Imagine spending 2 years on your knees, scrubbing and cleaning the office of your parents' murderer, while the man responsible walks past you every single day in a tailored suit, shaking hands with politicians, collecting awards, calling himself the guardian of history. When she packed her entire life into a single suitcase, her mission was simple: to bring down every single person who had a hand in her parents' death. While some people pray for justice, Prisca became it. Stay with me, because by the time we are done with this incredible story, and you understand what she was carrying and why she carried it alone, something in you is going to shift. Subscribe if you have not already. Hit that notification bell. Let's begin. Baltimore, Maryland, 1996. A baby girl was born to two people who loved each other completely and the world insufficiently to protect them from what was coming. Her mother was Grace Steves, Black American, warm, brilliant, the kind of woman who walked into a room and made it feel larger than it was. Her father was Han Jae-won, Korean, quiet, precise, with eyes that noticed everything and a laugh that arrived slowly and meant everything when it did. They were both academics, both researchers, both chasing the same truth from different angles: the intersection of colonial health policy and territorial dispossession across Asia and Africa. They met in her grandfather's office at Johns Hopkins University and got married within the year. And for 2 years, they were happy. In 1998, Han Jae-won and Grace Steves traveled to South Chungcheong Province in Korea as part of a research team documenting rural health conditions. What they found there was not what they expected. The contamination was too precise, too concentrated, too deliberately placed in communities that had been resisting land acquisition from a company called Daehan Land Holdings. They were getting close to something. Someone noticed. 31 people died in that province that year. The official record called it a public health failure, a tragic accident, a contaminated water infrastructure. Case closed. Han Jae-won and Grace Steves were among the dead. Their daughter Prisca was 2 years old. She does not remember their faces. She knows them only through a photograph her grandfather kept on his desk for 30 years. A man and a woman standing outside a community hall in Seoul, 1994. He is laughing at something off camera. She has her hand on her belly, newly pregnant, her face turned slightly toward him as though she cannot quite stop looking. Prisca keeps that photograph in her wallet. She has carried it every single day of her life. His name was Professor Han Sung-il, Korean, brilliant. He was one of the most significant historians of the 20th century, a world-renowned scholar of Afro-Asian diplomatic history who had spent 50 years documenting the overlooked solidarity networks between African and Asian independence movements. He was also Han Jae-won's father, Prisca's paternal grandfather, and he knew exactly what had happened to his son. He took Prisca back to Baltimore, raised her in a house on a quiet street where every room had a purpose and every surface had a story. Maps on the walls, manuscripts on the shelves. The smell of old paper and black coffee and the particular discipline of a man who had decided that grief was not going to be the last word. He taught her Korean from the classical texts, not modern Korean, classical. The language of palaces and scholars and queens who wrote their truths in Hanja because they knew the spoken word could be silenced, but the written word endured. He taught her to read documents the way a doctor reads a body, for what they were hiding as much as what they were saying. He taught her patience, thoroughness, the kind of absolute trustworthiness that makes people stop noticing you are in the room. And then he told her about the diary, not as a bedtime story, as a briefing. The missing royal diary of Queen Min, Empress Myeong-song, a document that had been hidden for nearly a century. He described it to her the way you describe something you have spent your life trying to reach. The paper, the binding, the damage on the lower right corner of the cover, the Hanja script, the fourth line that named Lee Dae-won by his clan title. Queen Min's instructions about the land. Like the Dead Sea Scrolls, it held layers of truth, each one more devastating than the last. Queen Min was the wife of the first emperor. During her last days on Earth, she wrote everything down because she understood that one day, when the right person found it, the full picture would finally be visible. The diary contained her written instruction that certain land parcels near the Palace District be held permanently in public trust, land that would eventually become the foundation of everything the Lee family built. It named Lee Dae-won explicitly, documenting his agreement with colonial authorities and what he received in exchange. Also contained land agreements and correspondence records that created an unbroken documented line from Lee Dae-won's 1932 betrayal all the way to the contamination event in South Chungcheong Province, the event that killed Prisca's parents. Without the diary, Professor Han's research was a collection of compelling but disconnected pieces. With it, the entire structure of the Lee family's century-long corruption became visible, provable, and complete. He spent 50 years trying to find it. He never did. He died in the spring of Prisca's 26th year. Old age, slow and dignified, in the house where he had lived for 30 years. She was with him. They had spent his final months going through everything, every document, every note, every connection he had mapped across 5 decades. At the end, he held her hand. "You are the most honest person I have ever known. That is not an accident. Go and finish it." She buried him. She packed one suitcase, and she bought a one-way ticket to Seoul. She arrived at Seoul Station on a Tuesday morning in March. 2 bags, a changed name, and a mission that had been 4 years in the making. Her real name was Prisca Han, but in Seoul she was Prisca Steves, her mother's surname. Common enough, unremarkable enough. Far enough from Han that no one would connect her to the historian whose name appeared in the footnotes of half the significant papers on Afro-Asian colonial history written in the last 40 years. She stood at the center of Seoul Station and studied the transit map the way her grandfather had taught her to study everything, methodically, from the outside in. A woman appeared beside her. Korean, about her age, in nursing scrubs, with a coffee in each hand and the expression of someone running late who has nevertheless decided to stop. "You look like you're trying to memorize it." "I am." The woman pointed at the map, explained the line, the transfer, which exit to use, and was gone, moving fast through the crowd, already late. That evening, returning from the district office where she had registered her address, Prisca walked back into the same station. The crowd moved around her in the rhythm of Seoul at rush hour. And there, on the opposite platform, was the same woman, still in scrubs, still carrying a coffee. Going the other direction. They saw each other at the same moment. "You again." Prisca smiled. It was the first time she had smiled since Baltimore. Her name was Ji-yeon Park. Within a week, they were friends. Ji-yeon was warm where Prisca was quiet, loud where Prisca was still. The kind of person who shows up not because it is convenient, but because showing up is simply who they are. Prisca told her everything, slowly, across weeks. Across late nights and meals Ji-yeon cooked because she said Prisca was eating like someone who had forgotten food was supposed to be enjoyable. Everything except one thing. She told Ji-yeon about her grandfather, her parents, the documents, the Lee family, the diary, the corporate corruption hiding beneath the cultural prestige of the Daehan Heritage Group. What she did not tell her was what lived underneath even that. The Gwangyang Foundation, a criminal network operating publicly as a charity, presenting itself as a beacon of community service and cultural preservation, while underneath it, functioned as the enforcement arm of everything the Lee family had ever needed to protect. Politicians owned, threats eliminated, evidence destroyed. Prisca knew that information was a weight Ji-yeon was safer not carrying. "What do you need me to do?" "Nothing yet. I just needed someone to know." "Okay, I know. Now, eat your food." She needed work. Her savings had a horizon, and Seoul was expensive. She found an opening at a private cultural archive in Yongsan. Administrative work, cataloging historical documents. Close enough to her real skills, far enough from her real name. At her second interview, during a tour of the archive, she noticed that several documents had been filed under the wrong provenance classifications. The archive was hiding where these documents came from. She went home, spent 2 evenings cross-referencing what she had seen against public records, and confirmed what she already suspected. The documents were likely stolen, being stored illegally, laundered through administrative classification. Before her final interview, the deputy director pulled her aside. He did not say it directly. He never needed to. He spoke about opportunity, about discretion, about the kind of people who built long and stable careers in sensitive institutions. She thanked him for his time, walked out, and filed a detailed report with the Cultural Heritage Administration that same afternoon. She did not get the job. That evening, she told Jian. Jian was furious on her behalf, naming exactly what was wrong and exactly who was wrong, not softening any of it. You did the right thing. You know you did. I know. Okay. I'm going to find you something else. 3 days later, Jian sent her a link. National Museum of Korea. Cleaning vacancy. I know it's not what you're trained for, but it's exactly where you need to be. Nothing honest is beneath you. Prisca applied the next morning. She was good at the work, not performing goodness, actual thoroughness. The kind that comes from someone who was taught that every object in a room has a history worth respecting. Within 3 months, she had a reputation among the senior custodial staff as someone you could trust with anything. Within 6, she was in the archival corridors. Within 14, she was cleaning the private liaison offices where the museum's relationship with the Daehan Heritage Group was managed. Within 20, she was on rotating contract at Daehan's private gallery, cleaning Jinwook's private study twice a month. Nobody knew her beyond the work. A quiet woman, diligent, thorough, keeps to herself, good with the old cases. She carried a small UV torch in her bag everywhere she went. Her grandfather's influence, an archivist's habit she had never shed. She called Ji-yun every Sunday, sometimes in the middle of the week when the weight of the patients became something she needed to put down for an hour. How much longer do you think? Until I find it. Or until I'm certain it isn't here. Okay, I'll keep the Sunday slot open. 3 weeks before the gala, Prisca was cleaning the display cases in the Daehan private gallery when she held her UV torch over the diary pages on display. The ink's spectral signature was wrong. The degradation pattern was wrong. The age was wrong. She had seen enough genuine documents at her grandfather's side to know exactly what manufactured aging looked like. The diary on display was a forgery. A highly sophisticated multi-million-dollar forgery. She said nothing. She finished cleaning the case, put the torch back in her bag, and went to clean the next room. I need you to stay with me right here. Because what Prisca does next is not what most people would do. Most people would run. Most people would call the police. Most people would protect themselves first. But Prisca had not spent 24 years, crossed an ocean, changed her name, and got on her knees in that building to walk away 3 weeks before everything was in place. She had a plan, and she was not finished yet. If you are not subscribed yet, do it right now. Hit that notification bell. Because what happens next is the part of this story that will stay with you long after it is over. Let's continue. She did not act immediately. She spent 3 weeks tracing the chemical composition of the fake ink using equipment she carried in her cleaning bag, tools her grandfather had given her, archivists, instruments that looked like nothing to anyone who did not know what they were. She documented everything, photographed the fake, built her case quietly and completely. And then, on an ordinary Thursday afternoon, she was assigned to deep clean Chairman Lee Jin-wook's private study. She worked methodically, the way she always worked, shelf by shelf, surface by surface. When she lifted a lacquered Joseon-era jewelry box to dust beneath it, she felt the weight shift wrongly. She set it down. She looked at it for a long moment with the stillness her grandfather had taught her. The most important things always announce themselves quietly, he used to say. If you are paying the right kind of attention. She lifted the velvet tray inside. The diary was beneath it. She had known its description her whole life. The paper, the binding, the damage on the lower right corner of the cover. She recognized it the way you recognize the face of someone you have never met but have heard described since childhood. She sat down on the floor of the private study. She did not cry. She held the diary carefully, the way her grandfather had taught her to hold things that mattered, and she breathed. Then she got to work. She photographed every single page, backed up the images to an encrypted archive, wrote to the independent Professor Choi, attaching everything, time-stamped and sealed in a third-party archive before the gala began. Then she replaced the real diary with the forgery and put the jewelry box back exactly where she had found it. She finished cleaning the study, turned off the light, walked out. That night, at 2 a.m., she sat on the floor of a storage room on sub-level 2 of the National Museum. Concrete walls, fluorescent light, the real diary in her lap, and she called Ji-Yun. "I found it." The line was silent for a long moment. Not because Ji-Yun was asleep, because she had been waiting for those 3 words for 24 months and was adjusting to the reality of them finally arriving. "Where are you?" "Sub-level 2. Are you safe?" "Yes." "Is it real?" "Yes." "Stay on the line." "I will." "Before we get to the gala, you need to understand who Lee Jin-wook really is. Because he did not build this empire alone. He inherited it, brick by brick, generation by generation, each one adding another layer of wealth, influence, and carefully buried crime. It started with Lee Dae-won, colonial-era Korea. A man who understood early that information and land were the same kind of power and aligned himself with whoever held both. In 1932, colonial authorities came to him with a problem. Certain communities were resisting land acquisition. Independence movement archivists were documenting what was being taken and from whom. Among those documents was the private diary of the late Queen Min, recently recovered by an independence archivist who understood exactly what it meant. Lee Dae-won arranged for the diary to be surrendered. In exchange, he received land grants, political protection, and a formal position as a cultural liaison officer, which meant in practice that he had the authority to decide which historical documents mattered and which ones disappeared. He told his family the diary had been lost. He told himself the same thing often enough that it became the version he believed. His son Lee Byung-chul took that land and that silence and turned them into a development company during the Reconstruction era. He understood that naked wealth was vulnerable, that it could be contested, legislated, redistributed, so he built something more durable: political connections, quiet influence, the first foundations of what would eventually become the Gwangmyeong Foundation, a network that presented itself to the world as a charitable organization dedicated to community welfare and cultural preservation. It was neither of those things. Then came Lee Sung-jin, the most dangerous of them all, because he was the smartest. He took his father's land holdings and converted them into the Daehan Heritage Group, a corporation whose stated purpose was the restoration and preservation of Korean historical sites. He cultivated government relationships, funded academic chairs, made the Lee family synonymous with the protection of Korean heritage. And through the Gwangmyeong Foundation, he built the criminal infrastructure that protected all of it: politicians on payroll, judges in his pocket, an international network of connections that made the Lee family, for all practical purposes, untouchable. In 1997, communities in South Chungcheong Province were resisting Daehan land holdings acquisition proposals. 2 researchers embedded in those communities had begun noticing that the resistance was being systematically undermined and were getting dangerously close to understanding how. Lee Sung-jin signed the authorization. The Gwangmyeong Foundation handled the rest. 31 people died. The researchers among them were Han Jae-won and Grace Steves. Lee Sung-jin retired in 2010. He lives in a house in Bundang with a garden he tends carefully. He has never spoken publicly about 1997. And then there is Jin-wook, the inheritor, the most polished version of the worst impulse. He took everything his father built and made it global, made it glamorous, made it the kind of institution that received awards from international cultural bodies and hosted galas attended by ministers and diplomats. He collected antique poetry in secret, wept alone at the palace ruins on his late mother's birthday because he genuinely loved Korean history. That was what made him so effective and so culpable. He had never heard the name Han Jae-won, never heard the name Grace Steves, never heard the name Prisca Han. He was about to. The hall was everything Jinwook knew how to build. Crystal and handbox silk and catering staff in white gloves. Ministers in the front row, diplomats in the middle, royal descendants in seats of honor. The translation screen is positioned for maximum visibility. Every detail calibrated for a single purpose, to make this the night that cemented the Lee family's legacy forever. Prisca was assigned to the display cases. She worked methodically. She did not look at the diary behind the glass. She did not need to. At 8 o'clock, Jinwook took the podium. His voice was warm during the performance. He spoke about Korean heritage, about the responsibility of guardianship, about what it meant to return something lost to the people it belonged to. The room was attentive and admiring. He opened the diary. He read the first page, the second, the third. He turned to the fourth page. The translation screen projected the text automatically, in real time, as the live interpreter worked. Several historians in the room had already shifted in their seats. The language was unusual, more archaic than expected. The phrasing is not consistent with the known fragments of Queen Min's existing correspondence. The fourth page, named Lee Dae-won by his clan title as the man who had surrendered the diary to colonial authorities in exchange for land grants in 1932. The screen was very large. The room was very quiet. Jinwook stopped. He looked at the screen. He looked at the page. The two were the same. His face did not collapse. It went very still, in the way faces go still when the ground beneath them has disappeared and the body has not yet received the information. He looked at the crowd. Every face he had trained himself to read across 20 years of gala diplomacy was doing something he had never seen those faces do. They were not performing their usual careful neutrality. They were watching him. His eyes moved through the room and found Prisca beside the display case, a young woman with a cloth in her hand. He crossed the room and every eye followed him. He stopped in front of her. What he said was ugly. It was the language of a man dismantling himself in real time, reaching for the oldest and most available weapon he had. You, an outsider, a temporary migrant worker hired to scrub our floors. You dared touch the sacred history of our nation? What could someone of your bloodline possibly understand about the tears, the honor, and the royal heritage written in these pages? How dare you desecrate a history that doesn't belong to you? The room was ice. Prisca set down her clothes. She stepped forward, her posture completely changing. She performed the deep, formal jiol reserved for Joseon royalty. Not the modern bow. The precise, ceremonial form, executed with absolute flawless precision, held for a full 3 counts. Every Korean cultural historian in the room recognized it immediately. Several of the older ministers went visibly rigid. When she rose, she spoke in the high court archaic dialect of the Joseon palace. She spoke it as a first language. In the register her grandfather had taught her from the classical texts in a house in Baltimore where nobody thought to look for her. Her voice filled the room with quiet and staggering authority. History does not belong to a bloodline, Chairman Lee. It belongs to the truth. You ask what I understand of honor. I understand that this diary was not written for your profit, but by a dying queen who wished her people to be free. Your great-grandfather sold that freedom for land. Your grandfather called the theft a legacy. Your father built a criminal empire on top of the silence. And today, you sell it for status and call it guardianship. You call me an outsider, yet I am the only one in this room who respected your ancestors enough to let them speak the truth. The script on these pages is written in Hanja, which you cannot even read without a teleprompter. Look at line 4. It names your great-grandfather as the betrayer. I did not desecrate your history, Chairman Lee. She paused. The room did not breathe. I liberated it from you. The cultural ministers moved immediately. Professor Choi, contacted by Prisca the morning of the gala, was already on a video call with the senior archivist. The encrypted photographs, time-stamped and held by a third party since that morning, made the chain of evidence complete. Authentication took under an hour. But the diary was only the beginning. The evidence Prisca had compiled, cross-referenced with 50 years of Professor Han Sung-il's research, did not just implicate the Daehan Heritage Group. It began to unravel everything underneath it. The Gwangmyeong Foundation, the international connections, the political protections, the infrastructure that had kept the Lee family untouchable for decades. The scandal reached social media before the gala's catering staff had cleared the first course. By morning, it was international. Jinwook was arrested before the night was over. His father, Lee Sung-jin, who had not left his house in Bundang in years, received a visit from investigators the following morning. The garden he had tended so carefully would have to wait. The 1,997 contamination event was reopened as a formal criminal investigation, this time with a documented institutional trail that led directly to his signature. The Daehan Heritage Group was dissolved under government seizure. The Gwangmyeong Foundation was exposed for exactly what it was. An international investigation spanning multiple countries began dismantling the network piece by piece, pulling on the thread Prisca had pulled until the entire structure came down. The land whose ownership traced back to Lee Dae-won's 1,932 betrayal reverted to public trust, exactly as Queen Min had intended when she wrote the words that had been hidden for nearly a century. Ji-yun found out about the Gwangmyeong Foundation the same way the rest of the world did, watching the news from her apartment, coffee in hand, the morning after the gala. She called Prisca immediately. "You knew about all of it?" "Yes." A long silence. "You were protecting me?" "Yes." "Don't do that again." "Okay." "Are you all right?" Prisca looked out of the window at Seoul, waking up around her. "I think so. For the first time in a long time. I think so." 2 years later, the National Museum of Korea opened a permanent exhibition, Solidarity, a global history of survival, built substantially on the archive of Professor Han Sung-il, a collection that documented, for the first time in a major institutional context, the overlooked networks of resistance and mutual support between African and Asian independence movements across the 20th century. Prisca designed the entrance herself, a wide corridor, no display cases, just text on the walls. Quotes from people who had documented the truth when the truth was dangerous to document. Her grandfather's words were among them. On opening morning, she walked through the gates with a group of students from Gwangju High School, 12 and 13-year-olds, loud and curious, and entirely unaware of everything it had cost to build the room they were about to walk into. She stopped at the entrance for just a moment. His name was on the wall. Professor Han Sung-il. She touched it once, lightly, the way you touch something you have been waiting a very long time to see. Then she turned to her students. "This way," and led them through the gates and into the light. The ink of truth cannot be forged. It cannot be hidden. It cannot be destroyed. It only waits for the right person to find it and set it free. If this story moved you, you already know what to do. Like this video, subscribe if you haven't, and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And I want to hear from you. Drop a comment and tell me, where are you watching from and what part of the story hit you the hardest?